Teachers of Reddit, what is the weirdest excuse you've ever heard that turned out to be true? When I was a HS student we had classwork and homework on the first day. My teacher claimed to have never received them from me, and I was like, look street the attendance, I was there. Well, don't you remember someone not doing their work on the first day? She just said she didn't have it, despite people who don't even like me vouching for me. I redid the assignments and 3 months later she returned my original assignments by having kids pass it to me. I sat at the back. She never apologized or anything. I had a teacher in 9th grade give me a 0 on a test for not doing it. It was an in-class exam, and I was not marked as absent. I was a straight A student, eventual salutatorian, lost by 0.0000000001 GPA. Only time the school had to literally account for every single assignment. Was not allowed to retake. So this teacher losing my test cost me valedictorian. But you better bet my mother typed up a signature form and had me have the teacher sign it every single time I turned anything in to say she had received it. TC, my mom won't help me with my homework. My brother said she is taking drugs. We splashed water on her but it didn't work. I work in the early childhood education field. In school my professor told me a story where she was observing a preschool classroom in Chicago. She's watching one little girl in the dramatic play area. The poor had a phone in one hand pressed to her ear and was bouncing a baby in her other hand. To the phone she says, "Girl, guess what? The police showed up and took to jail. Yep. They got ALLL the drugs." So heartbreaking. BC. That is very likely her modeling behavior that she sees in her home. I'm a foster parent and it's just heartbreaking what some of these kids go through. Long-term foster child now happily my adopted child was setting up her Barbie dolls one day. This one is the judge. This is the caseworker. When she was given a dose of medicine in one of those little cups, she put the cup on the counter, said ready, set, go. Took the medicine and downed it, like she was taking a shot. I failed to show up to class one time and this is the true story I told my teacher. I was in my electronics lab and the power supply kept making this horrible buzzing grinding sound. I'd smack it, and it'd shut up for a while, before doing it again. Now, you're thinking this was my alarm clock, and I was dreaming about being in the lab. And you're quite right. The thing is, in this dream I was a gigantic grape with arms and legs and a face. So once I realized that it was my alarm clock and I needed to get to class, I was still enough in the dream to think I was still a grape. And fruit doesn't have to go to class. So I didn't. The teacher stared at me for about 15 seconds and said I wish I was a grape. And not another word was said about it. Now the real question is, are you a man dreaming of being a grape in a electronics lab, or are you a grape in a electronics lab dreaming of being a human? You just convinced me that I want to be a grape. Did you have any surgery done on you by chance? I've had a few. I'll be 2 weeks late for class because I'll be in Beijing at the Olympics. My father was murdered. I was deported last night. Funny story about the last excuse. One day, this great guy in my P.E class completely disappears for like half the year. Nobody could reach him. He wasn't responding to any phones, messages, DMs, etc. And part of his family was gone too. Even the teachers were puzzled and worried. So he comes back sometime later, and we all joke around about how he was deported. Well, turns out he actually did get deported. For some reason, they mistook his family for illegal immigrants and detained them for a month, then sent them to the Dominican. His family was half Puerto Rican, half Mexican, so it made no sense why they were sent to the doctor, and at the very least, he himself was also a U.S. citizen. His family filed to go back to the USA immediately. My bio teacher told me this story. During a biology lesson they were outside. My school is near a small lake. A student ended up falling in and getting their legs stuck in the mud. The bio teacher had to rescue them and hose them off behind the school. The next period teacher didn't believe them despite the student being soaking wet. What's with all these stories of students going to their next class soaking wet? If something like that happened in my school, the kid would either go home or get new clothes brought to the school. Nobody wants a soggy kid in their classroom. I was once this kid. Although not soaked, but definitely at hey you should change status. The students couldn't care less, and I guess it's a matter of when the next teacher notices you and bothers to ask what happened. Also, when asked by the principal if I wanted to go home and change, I declined. I figured that was more embarrassing defeating than just dead trying. High schooler logic. I taught high school in a town with a lot of trains passing through. They have a big classification yard and also frequent Amtrak trains. The major east-west street was frequently beset by slow trains crossing, and locals knew how to get around them via side streets. I lived east of the tracks, and the school was on that side, so it rarely affected me. One day, though, I get to school, and there are about 12 kids missing from my first period class. I check the attendance notes from the office, and no one had been marked as sick. After about 20 minutes, I start hearing dozens of kids making their way into the school. Turns out, not only was a huge freight train blocking Main Street, but both of the side street shortcuts coming from the west were blocked due to accidents. The entire west side of town was either completely stuck in traffic, or had to take a 20-minute detour up to the highway to go around to the other side. I had a 6th grader come into class very sleepy during test day. I asked her why, and she said she is sleeping next to her dead grandma in the living room, and has been too scared to sleep. I asked her parents about this. Turns out it's a cultural practice of theirs to keep the dead relative in the home for a few days, while their spirit makes its journey to the afterlife. To answer some of your questions, she was from a large Hmong family that lived in a small apartment. She also mentioned before the grandmother passed, her family attached bells to the grandmother's clothing to scare away the spirits that were making her sick. Okay, that's enough Reddit for today. Not okay. I've only been at work for 50 minutes. What am I supposed to do for 7 hours and 10 minutes? Just in case they decide to make you turn. Seriously though, I'm kind of curious as to what culture. I was a student. It was the first day of school. There were 6 of us who were late. The reason the school bus stop was moved to a new location. We all piled into my mother's car. We went to the principal's office. The office manager said notice letters were sent to us, so she checked her log. The notices were never sent out. See, it says right here the notices were sent out on date pending. I typed your symptoms into the thing up here, and it says you could have network connectivity problems. Let me just check my filing cabinet. See, here's the note, here's my copy, and your copy, and his copy, and, oh I totally stole that joke from some later season of MASH. This is either the least or most satisfying moment in this situation, depending on whether they apologize or keep fighting. I was the student. My goat ate my homework. I had to bring the goat in to prove I had a goat. Maybe the teacher believed you, but made you bring in your goat so she could pet it. I did bring in what was left of the homework. Teacher probably thought there's either a real goat or this kid ate half the homework just to get out of it. Where did you live when this happened, and why did you have a goat? Grew up on a small farm. The goat was actually a gift from a family friend. It had been bottle fed since it was rejected by the other goats. Since it was bottle fed, it was very comfortable with people and behaved more like a dog than a normal goat. We actually let it wander the house. I'll be vague on location for privacy reasons. It was in a small average town in US. I have a cousin who went to his math class and turned in his homework without any proof showing he worked on the problem. When asked why he didn't show his work, he responded with, "A NASA rocket scientist showed me a better way." Well, no one believes him until they called his dad, and he had to explain they had a family friend from out of town staying at their house, and yes, he was actually a NASA rocket scientist. How does that explain why he didn't show his work? Sounds to me like he got the answers and didn't bother to write down the explanation. I had a NASA satellite scientist as a math teacher pre-calc. She made us show our work. She also answered the "when will we ever use this" question with an example of how she has used that specific bit of math recent to that lesson. She was awesome. A student asked a fellow instructor if he could go home on leave because his dog died. The instructor told him no and gave him the generic speech on how he'd miss a lot of things in the military during his career, yada yada. The student had a meltdown and was sent to task to our boss, a master chief, and explained the full story. Apparently this guy's parents and siblings all died several years before in an auto accident, and the dog was his only remaining family. He lived with other relatives afterward, but still. The chain of command followed up on the story. It was true, and we sent him home on leave. We started using that as a cautionary tale for new instructors, telling them to be sympathetic when mentoring a student, because you never know what they've been through, and a little empathy can make a big difference. One of my female students drives 20 minutes to school and searches for a parking spot. After 2 minutes of searching with no result, she drives all the way back home. That was her excuse. There was no space. I've done this. There were so many commuters at my college, because the school accepted way too many people, even had to rent out rooms at a hotel to accommodate the students who were living there. So I drove to class circled for 20 minutes with not one spot on campus. If you park illegally, it's a $100 ticket. So I said F it and left. When the professor asked why, I said there's no parking, and I'm not paying $100 on top of the hundreds I already spent to take this class. She just nodded. Last year our company commander in JROTC was always late. He didn't show up one Friday and no one thought of it. Turns out when he showed up Monday he had just been released from jail an hour before. Apparently he was arrested on Friday because he was driving a friend's car that he couldn't prove he was allowed to drive. Friend was out of town, so the arresting officer assumed the car was stolen and arrested him. When they got no response all weekend, they told him he could either pay bail or stay all weekend. Being a broke high school student, he had to stay. When he came back to school Monday, he was late to class because he had just been released from jail after his friend contacted the police to let them know the car was borrowed and in fact not stolen. I was teaching English in my dad's school in Venezuela. Crime rates are insane. It was common hearing students getting shot while stealing or in gang wars. I was taking attendance and someone told me that a missing student was shot 14 times after he won a Latin machine dance competition and the loser didn't like it. I thought it was a joke, but then his mom came to the school to tell us about it. The competition was in a really dangerous slum in Caracas, the type where you ask the local crime lord permission to even enter, and the prize was representing that crime lord in a Puerto Rico international competition between crime lords. He survived and dropped out of school to go to Puerto Rico. Never heard from him ever again.